George Weah.
Birthplace, Monrovia, Liberia. More George Weah 758 of 1310. The best soccer players of all time 418 of 1816. The best athletes of all time 120 of 164. The best soccer players of the 90s.
George Reeves.
Birthplace, Woolstock, Iowa, United States of America. More George Reeves 9 of 10 actors who regret their comic book movie roles 156 of 237. Which actor would you bring back for one final movie? 29 of 55. The best actors in live-action comic book TV shows.
George Parros.
Birthplace, Scenery Hill, Pennsylvania. More George Parros 13 of 20 athletes with the best facial hair 19 of 54. The greatest Anaheim Ducks of all time 10 of 27. 26 athletes who are nerds.
George McGovern.
Birthplace, Avon, South Dakota, USA. More George McGovern 116 of 600. Every person who has hosted Saturday Night Live 8 of 16. Hunter S. Thompson's iconic and famous friends 15 of 57. Here's what every notable presidential election loser ended up doing with their life.
George Frideric Handel.
Birthplace, Halle, Germany. More George Frideric Handel 71 of 1891. The greatest musical artists of all time 34 of 368. The best classical composers 102 of 525. Which artist would you bring back from the dead to write one more song?
George Eads.
Birthplace, Fort Worth, Texas, USA.
George Davis.
Birthplace, Cohoes, New York. More George Davis 189 of 708. The best hitters, baseball history 312 of 582. The greatest baseball players of all time 54 of 132. The greatest shortstops of all time.
George Bernard Shaw.
Birthplace, Dublin, Republic of Ireland. More George Bernard Shaw. The best George Bernard Shaw quotes 159 of 1172. The best writers of all time 469 of 1355. The greatest minds of all time.
George Thorogood.
Birthplace, United States of America. Delaware, United States, with territories. Wilmington. More George Thorogood 147 of 1728. The best rock bands of all time 62 of 639. The greatest lead guitarists of all time 124 of 263. The greatest classic rock bands.
George A. Romero.
Birthplace, New York City, New York, United States of America. More George A. Romero. The Dark Half is a George Romero-Stephen King collaboration that never got its due. 246 of 309 famous people most likely to live to 100. 124 of 743. The greatest directors in movie history.
George Martin.
Birthplace, HM Prison, Holloway, London, United Kingdom. More George Martin 54 of 58. The greatest harpsichordists of all time, one of 12 who should be the fifth Beatle. 33 of 37 famous people who have been knighted.
George Chuvalo.
Birthplace, Toronto, Canada more George Chuvalo 111 of 178 the best boxers of all time 38 of 100 the best heavyweight boxers of all time 66 of 207 the best boxers of the 20th century.
George Benson.
Birthplace, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Area code 412. Contiguous United States. United States of America more George Benson. The best George Benson albums of all time 497 of 739. The best singers of all time 110 of 195. The greatest male pop singers of all time.
George Washington Carver.
More George Washington Carver 737 of 2443, the most influential people of all time 65 of 69, 60 plus adopted celebrities 34 of 796 famous American inventors list.
George Sanders.
Birthplace, St. Petersburg, Russia more George Sanders 422 of 1017 the best actors in film history 309 of 310 the coolest actors ever 80 of 113 the best English actors of all time.
George Blanda.
Birthplace, Youngwood, Pennsylvania more George Blanda 38 of 252 the best quarterbacks of all time 138 of 1323 the best football players ever 3 of 66 the best Chicago Bears quarterbacks of all time.
George Marshall.
Birthplace, Uniontown, Pennsylvania, USA more George Marshall 107 of 410, the most important military leaders in world history 18 of 101, the most beloved U.S. veterans 32 of 432, the most important leaders in history.
George Halas.
Birthplace, Chicago, Illinois, United States of America more George Halas 201 of 214 the best wide receivers of all time 9 of 61 the best NFL coaches of all time 11 of 144 the greatest Chicago Bears of all time.
George Peppard.
Birthplace, Detroit, Michigan, United States of America more George Peppard 245 of 302 the greatest actors who have never won an Oscar for acting 841 of 1883 the greatest actors and actresses in entertainment history 135 of 170 if you fought to the death.
George Hill.
Birthplace, Indianapolis, Indiana more George Hill 48 of 54 the most hated active NBA players 100 of 150 the greatest point guards in NBA history 166 of 294 the top 100 plus NBA players today.
George Wallace.
Birthplace, Clio, Alabama, USA more George Wallace 218 of 302 the most influential politicians in American history 12 of 14 the most viable third-party U.S. presidential candidates 13 of 38 famous people with Parkinson's disease.
George Clinton.
Birthplace, Kannapolis, North Carolina, USA more George Clinton 157 of 225 the greatest living rock songwriters 412 of 816 these poetic geniuses wrote your favorite songs of all time.
George Brett.
Birthplace, Glendale, West Virginia. More George Brett, 91 of 150 athletes you didn't know were conservative, 10 of 39 longest hitting streaks in baseball, 46 of 255 the best players in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
George McGinnis.
Birthplace, Indianapolis, Indiana. More George McGinnis, 95 of 786 the top NBA players of all time, 119 of 161 the best NBA players with no championship rings, 5 of 65 the greatest Indiana Hoosiers basketball players of all time.
George Pataki.
Birthplace, Peekskill, New York, United States of America. More George Pataki, 3 of 12 Renos in the Wild, 5 of 29 Republicans, who are the best at reaching across the aisle, 6 of 14 family values, which GOP candidates' families seem happy.
George C. Scott.
Birthplace, Wise, Virginia, United States of America.
George Segal.
Birthplace, Great Neck, New York City, New York, United States of America. More George Segal, 475 of 1017, the best actors in film history, 338 of 904 celebrity death pool, 2021, 665 of 1883, the greatest actors and actresses in entertainment history.
George Gershwin.
Birthplace, New York City, New York. More George Gershwin, 107 of 525. Which artist would you bring back from the dead to write one more song? 294 of 1891. The greatest musical artists of all time, 21 of 368. The best classical composers.
George Kennedy.
Birthplace, New York City, New York, United States of America. More George Kennedy, 65 of 163. The greatest Western movie stars, 77 of 600. Every person who has hosted Saturday Night Live, 170 of 432. Famous tall men over 6'4".
George Mikan.
Birthplace, Joliet, Illinois. More George Mikan, 49 of 786. The top NBA players of all time, 16 of 232. The best white players in NBA history, 30 of 165. The greatest NBA centers of all time.
George Gervin.
Birthplace, Detroit, Michigan. More George Gervin, 20 of 161. The best NBA players with no championship rings, 107 of 107. The greatest Lakers of all time.
George Strait.
Birthplace, Poteet, Texas, USA. More George Strait. The best George Strait albums of all time, 245 of 383. The greatest musical artists of the 90s.
George Soros.
Birthplace, Budapest, Hungary. More George Soros, 94 of 105. The most influential contemporary Americans, 10 of 30. Real-world Avengers villains.
George S. Patton.
Birthplace, San Gabriel, California. More George S. Patton. The best George S. Patton quotes 89 of 410, the most important military leaders in world history, 14 of 30 of history's biggest badasses.
George Lopez.
Birthplace, Mission Hills, Los Angeles, California, United States of America. More George Lopez, 40 of 57, the best male talk show hosts in TV history. 151 of 155, the best talk show hosts of daytime, late night, and all time.
George R. Martin.
Birthplace, Bayonne, New Jersey, United States of America. More George R. Martin, the utterly bizarre original ending to Game of Thrones. Surprising facts about George R. Martin's writing habits.
George Burns.
Birthplace, New York City, New York, United States of America. More George Burns, 36 of 339, the funniest people of all time. 151 of 583, the greatest entertainers of all time.
George Jones.
Birthplace, Saratoga, Texas, United States of America. More George Jones, the best George Jones albums of all time, the best George Jones songs. 108 of 193, rock stars whose deaths were the most untimely.
George Orwell.
Birthplace, Motihari, India. More George Orwell, 16 things you didn't know about George Orwell, the best George Orwell books.
George Best.
Birthplace, Belfast, United Kingdom. More George Best, 32 of 1310, the best soccer players of all time. 23 of 1816, the best athletes of all time. 7 of 103, coolest soccer players.
George Carlin.
Birthplace, Manhattan, New York City, New York, USA. More George Carlin. How George Carlin, using 7 words on the radio, caused a landmark Supreme Court decision. 1 of 233, the funniest stand-up comedians of all time. 614 of 1355, the greatest minds of all time.
George Michael.
Birthplace, East Finchley, London, United Kingdom. More George Michael, 58 of 316, the greatest singers of the past 30 years. 421 of 1728, the best rock bands of all time.
George H. Bush.
Birthplace, Milton, Massachusetts, United States of America. More George H. Bush, 162 of 269, the most trustworthy celebrities in the world. 15 of 44, which U.S. presidents do you wish were in charge right now? 1042 of 2443, the most influential people of all time.
George Takei.
Birthplace, Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, California, United States of America.
George Foreman.
Birthplace, Marshall, Texas, USA. More George Foreman, 8 of 178, the best boxers of all time. 10 of 207, the best boxers of the 20th century.
George Clooney.
Birthplace, Lexington, Kentucky, United States of America. More George Clooney, the best George Clooney movies. 92 of 264, the best male actors working today. 62 of 310, the coolest actors ever.
George W. Bush.
Birthplace, New Haven, Connecticut, United States of America. More George W. Bush, all 33. George W. Bush original paintings that were made public. Bush-isms, Funny George Bush quotes.
George Washington.
Birthplace, Pope's Creek, Colony of Virginia, British America. More George Washington. What was George Washington's private life like? 13 small but poignant facts we just learned about George Washington.
George Harrison.
Birthplace, Liverpool, United Kingdom. More George Harrison. The best George Harrison albums of all time, 62 of 603. The best rock vocalists, 379 of 739. The best singers of all time.
George Lucas.
Birthplace, Modesto, California, United States of America. More George Lucas. Everything you need to know about Skywalker Ranch before you visit. 508 of 1172. The best writers of all time, 5 of 50. The best celebrity Star Wars cameos. Rank.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the support and likes and comments down below, and also thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Then take care, bye.